that's why I can't do it. Okay.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the joint Health, Human Services, Youth Education, Housing, Land Use and Housing Committee meeting. Today is, this is our monthly meeting. We're actually having a joint meeting this month. We have a special topic for you. I am the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And we will later hear from the chair of the other committee. But before we start the meeting, we have a special agenda today, a presentation about the mayor's plan on housing and homelessness. But before we start the meeting, start the main agenda item, I would like to have Jake explain the procedures of the meeting.
Thanks, May. Hi, everyone. Welcome. A couple quick reminders for folks who've been here before or maybe first time. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube later. The Zoom chat will only be used for attendance or technical assistance. In terms of attendance, that means that if you are not a committee member, if you could take some time now to put your name and your affiliation, if that's applicable, in the chat. The chair will recognize committee members and then non-committee members. If there is time to speak, please remain muted unless you're recognized by the chair to speak. In order to be recognized, just raise your hand on Zoom. May, I think that's everything.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Okay, so now before we start the meeting, we will take the roll call for the committee members. Jake or Thomas, which one of you are going to do it? Or Jake, do you have the list?
I do have the list in front of me. Would you like me to call roll for both committees?
Yes.
All right. May Lee.
Here.
Thomas Rosa.
Here.
Larissa.
She's absent.
Anna.
Here.
David. Eric.
Oh, was that David Crane?
David Crane, yes.
He shouldn't be on.
He's not on our committee.
Okay,
So
apologies.
okay.
I'm looking at the
Yeah, no problem.
Did I call Eric? Eric Diaz?
Yes.
Larry Fenn.
Here.
Anisha Stephen is absent. Jake Gold here. Alastair Economicus is absent. Andrea Gordillo.
Here.
Herman Hewitt. Trevor Holland.
Well, he's here, but
Yeah, I see him here.
Present here.
Thank you, Trevor. Alicia Lewis Coleman.
Yes, present.
Laura Lugo. Heidi Schmidt.
she is not here.
Arnett Scott. Rodney Washington.
Yeah.
Oh,
thank
Rodney,
you.
is there a reason why your hand is raised?
I don't know. I don't know why it's raised.
I lowered
It's
it.
off now.
I lowered
Okay,
Okay.
I got it. Thank you.
Carmen Perez.
Here.
Thank you. Damaris Reyes. Sandra Strother.
Present.
Thank you. Jackie Wong. Dominic Berg. And Steve Herrick. All right, that is everyone. Apologies for my very loud radiator.
Okay, thank you, Jake. So there's also the business of approving the minutes. Jake, you can ask your committee, but I will ask my committee about last month's Health and Human Services minutes. It was sent out to you. Do you have any changes or revisions? If so, raise your hand. If not, they're deemed approved. Okay, so the Human Service Committee meeting minutes from last month are approved. So
The Land Use Committee did not meet last month, so I don't believe we have minutes to approve.
We would approve the minutes from the months before.
Sure. The minutes from our October meeting were sent out. Did anyone have any amendments to those minutes? Without objection, they will be approved. All right.
okay, thank you. Okay, so we can start the meeting. The main agenda item of the meeting, which is a presentation on the mayor's plan for housing and homelessness. We have presenters today from the Sheena, who is with the mayor's chief housing officer. And we also have HPD and DHS. So you may go ahead and start.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here and to chat with you tonight. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff to Chief Housing Officer Jessica Katz. My name is Sheena Kong, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague Ahmed Tigani, the First Deputy Commissioner at HPD, as well as Marika Scott McFadden from DHS. She's the Deputy Commissioner for Intergovernmental Affairs, as well as Iris Rodriguez, who is the Deputy Commissioner for Adult Services at DHS. And I'm going to share a presentation and a brief overview of Housing Our Neighbors, Mayor Adams's Housing and Homelessness Plan, which was released earlier this year in July. And then we will have some time to answer your questions and talk about anything else that you'd like to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Everybody see okay?
Yep.
Great. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just lay the groundwork for what our thinking was behind this housing plan and how we approached it. One thing that we wanted to do was build in the lived experience of New Yorkers who directly are impacted and experience the housing and homelessness crisis, which we know impacts too many people every day in our city. And so we really wanted to make sure that we're not only hearing from the sort of developers and partners in our affordable housing industry that we work with on a daily basis, but also be hearing directly from residents so that we came up with a plan that reflects the priorities of New Yorkers and how they experience our housing and homelessness crisis. So we did that through engagement with NYCHA residents, through engagement with folks who have lived experience of homelessness and who are living in shelter, as well as with our partners in affordable housing, housing providers, homelessness service providers, advocates, and many more. We are continuing to make significant capital investments in affordable housing, and this blueprint is a little bit of a divergence from previous administration's housing plans because we are focusing on more than just creating and preserving a certain number of affordable units over X number of years. That being said, however, that is still at the heart of our housing plan. It is still at the heart of the housing work that we do. And so we're going to continue making those critical investments in creating and preserving affordable housing. We had the largest capital budget for affordable housing that the city has ever seen in fiscal year 23 and are very excited about the resources that that creates for us to create more affordable homes. This was $22 billion budget in the capital plan over the next 10 years. We also are including the New York City Public Housing Authority and plans to improve living conditions for our NYCHA residents in this housing plan for the first time. And we recently celebrated the passage of state legislation that allows us to create the NYCHA Preservation Trust, which actually unlocks up to another $10 billion potentially in federal bond financing to rehab NYCHA units and improve the homes of our public housing residents. So in the interest of having a holistic housing plan that looks at homelessness and public housing and health and safety and lots of topics just that sort of move beyond a unit target, we are including the number of NYCHA units preserved and rehabbed in our annual unit count and how we track our progress for the first time. Just to set the stage for how we are approaching this, we recognize that we have a severe supply shortage that has made rents go up and made housing more affordable or more expensive for everyone across the board. This is partially because we just haven't produced enough new housing in the last several decades to keep up with how many people are moving to New York City. The same is true for jobs. We've added a lot more new jobs than we have housing for people who are then moving here to take those jobs. And just to put this in the context of some other cities, there's many places across the country that are growing very quickly because they are relatively affordable and perceived to have a high quality of life. When you look at our housing production in relation to how many residents we have, it's actually much, much lower than lots of our peer cities that are expanding quickly. We're sort of we're below San Francisco, which is, I think, a nationally recognized affordable housing crunch in San Francisco, and we're actually producing fewer units per 1,000 residents than them. We're closer down to Philadelphia and Chicago and other cities that have had a different trajectory in terms of their population growth. So really at the core of this plan, we're looking to increase supply to address this dire housing shortage. Increase our supply both of affordable housing, the HPD and HDC finance, as well as market rate housing, because by increasing supply, we can bring rents and prices down across the board. And then in addition to the sort of supply agenda and the really robust capital budget that we're putting towards affordable housing finance, we are looking at all of the other benefits that housing can provide, which include access to jobs and schools and other fundamental resources that New Yorkers need to thrive, better health outcomes and improved public safety as our housing affects our health and safety, opportunities for households to generate wealth through housing, job creation and economic growth that benefits communities equitably, as well as sustainability and climate resiliency in the face of climate change. So to come up with this plan that is really trying to address a lot of things at once, but also harness all of the benefits that housing can provide beyond just a roof over our heads, we worked with lots of different agencies and mayor's offices across the city to come up with this plan that includes strategies that you might not think of as housing strategies. We worked with a lot of agencies that don't have housing in their title, as well as our core agencies, to really make sure that we are addressing all of those outcomes and benefits that we want our housing policy to provide. We are also in the interest of having a much more customer service focused administration that is really focused on the resident experience and how we deliver services to New Yorkers, changing how we measure our impact. So not just looking at the number of deals that we close and the number of units that we're financing, but also how long it takes to then connect New Yorkers to those units, how long it takes to help a New Yorker with a housing voucher move into a unit. And again, we're also including the number of NYCHA units preserved and rehabbed in our annual unit count for the first time. It's really important to note that both NYCHA and homelessness have typically been treated in separate plans from the housing plan. And so here we're really hoping to focus on the housing needs of New Yorkers who need housing the most and who are living in public housing as part of our overall holistic strategy. So the blueprint itself is divided into 5 chapters. The first chapter is focused on NYCHA. The second chapter was developed in very close conjunction with DSS and with the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, and that's focused on homelessness and housing instability. The third chapter is where we are talking about creating and preserving affordable housing, where all of HPD and HDC's work to create and preserve affordable homes really lives. The fourth chapter looks at how we can leverage our housing policy to improve the health and safety of New Yorkers. And the final section is on reducing administrative burden, again, to really focus on how residents are benefiting and experiencing our services, and to make sure that the processes that people have to go through to access affordable housing or rental assistance or anything else that's crucial to their ability to thrive are, doable and not quite so overcomplicated and burdensome in ways that, we know that bureaucratic hurdles can get in the way. And so we're really looking to cut through that red tape and move people into homes faster. So the first chapter is on NYCHA and includes a menu of options for how we are addressing the capital needs at NYCHA, which we know is the main struggle and challenge that we're dealing with, is how to address the massive backlog of capital needs that often put residents in less than favorable housing conditions. So we are advancing long-term strategies to address those capital needs, and at the same time making a lot of nearer term operational changes to how the authority operates to make sure that it's doing a better job of being a landlord and providing the essential services to residents so that they have a better experience in their daily lives. We are also trying to include in all of those policies and the options that we're putting together to address capital needs, residents as a core sort of decision maker and amplifying resident voices and decision making around how we're going about improving their services and their homes. And then finally, we're investing in a suite of programs to improve the health and safety of NYCHA residents, both in the near and long term. On homelessness, we looked at policies and programs to really intervene in every cycle or every phase in the cycle of housing instability and homelessness. The first thing that we need to do that is to really break down government silos that can sort of keep our housing and human service public servants and agencies sometimes from being able to work together as effectively as possible. So we have tried to be very collaborative in this administration to make sure that we are framing homelessness as a housing problem and then creating the housing solutions that homeless individuals need, as well as providing the supportive services that families and individuals may need. To prevent homelessness and to prevent more New Yorkers from going into shelter or experiencing homelessness, we have a suite of tools to combat housing instability and help more people stay housed. Unfortunately, we do already have tens of thousands of New Yorkers who are living in shelter. So for those residents, we are improving shelter and services to make sure that New Yorkers experiencing homelessness are living in good conditions and accessing the services they need. We're also looking at ways to move people who are currently in shelter back into permanent housing faster and to really streamline and increase shelter exits so that more folks are getting back into that safe and stable situation as fast as possible. And then once that's completed, we're advancing policies and programs to reduce the risk of returning to shelter so that once folks have become permanently housed, they don't experience housing instability and go back into shelter and experience all of the devastating impacts of homelessness again. In our third chapter, Create and Preserve Affordable Housing, as I mentioned previously, we are really looking at ways to accelerate and increase the capacity for housing supply citywide through zoning and regulatory reforms, as well as through the financing tools that we have long employed to create and preserve affordable homes. And these plans are really intended to raise the supply of housing across the board so that rents and housing prices will go down once there's more options for everyone. So you may be familiar with the mayor's City of Yes plans to advance a series of citywide zoning text amendments that will make it easier and more flexible to increase housing supply. And so those commitments are central to our housing strategy here. We're also focusing on the housing needs of seniors and people with disabilities, especially in the affordable housing and supportive housing that HPD finances, and looking at how to increase different options for folks who may need services while they're in a residential setting. We want to really focus on preservation to make sure that we're preserving both the affordability and the quality of existing low cost and affordable housing so that we're not losing affordable homes or risking tenants in those homes being displaced. One thing that the Chief Housing Officer wanted to make sure we really focus on here as well is home ownership, which is something that, you know, the New York is a city of renters primarily, and that is, you know, to some degree inherent in how our population flows, but is also largely driven by the fact that it's just very expensive to purchase a home here. And we really need to focus on investing in more affordable homeownership opportunities, both as a way to increase racial equity and as a way to help households generate wealth that can be passed along to future generations. At the same time, we're increasing our tools to promote housing stability for renters and providing inclusive development opportunities for equitable growth. So here we want to take a really strong focus on MWBEs and opportunities for MWBEs and BIPOC-led nonprofits to be able to benefit in the sort of economic development benefits that housing can provide. The fourth chapter is on improving health and safety, and we felt it was really important to address the fact that our housing and where we live does have such a huge impact on our health, and especially in the face of climate change, increasingly safety as we're experiencing more and more, flash flooding and hurricanes and storms that can put people who are in lower quality housing or in vulnerable areas at risk. So the first section is on improving housing quality to ensure safe and healthy living conditions. We talk about lead and how to combat lead exposure for children in their homes, strategies to strengthen our fire safety and make sure that folks are not living in conditions that may trigger asthma or other underlying health conditions. And then the second and third sections in this chapter are really focused on keeping New Yorkers safe, both during climate events and in the long term, making the investments in our housing stock to make it more sustainable and resilient so that we can better weather the impacts of climate change and also reduce our contributions to climate change through carbon emissions. And then the final chapter on administrative burden outlines a suite of things that we can do in a short period of time, and many of which we've already accomplished in the last few months to reduce administrative burden. So eliminating barriers like the absent parent form from our Section 8 process, overhauling the Section 8 technology at HPD so that everything is a little bit faster and more streamlined and less paperwork being required to be dropped off in person or shuttled from agency to agency and can just be electronically transferred. That all cuts down on the time and burden that it is levied onto folks who are applying for our housing assistance. Another great example of sometimes where our rules are outdated or the way that we sort of do our programs and processes can be a little bit outdated, and that ends up making it take more time or energy than is needed to accomplish something. We ended up moving the NYCHA Section 8 briefing online. So I think this is a really good example of administrative burden and how it can impact folks. Prior to the pandemic, everyone who was applying to Section 8 through NYCHA had to schedule a phone briefing to be read, like their rights and responsibilities as a Section 8 recipient. And just so that they could have that sort of box checked, which is required by HUD before receiving their voucher. But because of very high demand, that phone briefing system could often take like 3 to 6 weeks. And then if people missed the phone call, they have to go through the whole process to set up a new appointment. So NYCHA ended up just moving that whole thing to like a YouTube video that NYCHA people who are applying for Section 8 can just watch and then say, yes, I watched the video. And if I have additional questions, go to these resources. And it actually cut down the time that this process takes by several weeks, just by a very simple change. So I think that's very exemplary of the type of changes that we're looking to make here. One other thing that we're looking to do is eliminate the use of psychiatric evaluations as a barrier to supportive housing so that folks are able to become eligible for and get recertified for supportive housing much easier if they already have a history of, if they already have a clinical history that would indicate their eligibility. And then we are implementing a back-end audit for income verification in the affordable housing lottery at HPD and HDC. This is something that the agencies are already doing for many units and are working on implementing for the rest. But this, again, just cuts out one stage of paperwork review that the agency has to do, and that a New Yorker might have to sit in a homeless shelter for that much longer, just so while we go through their paperwork, essentially. And then in the long term, to keep this focus on administrative burden and moving folks into homes faster, we are adding more people-focused metrics to the MMR. We already included many of those metrics in the fiscal 22 MMR that was released in September, and we're working on building out our data and technology systems to add additional metrics in the years to come. We are going to take and are in the process of really evaluating and process mapping and doing a deep dive on all of the administrative burdens that are involved in our social safety net and housing assistance programs. And then we're also advocating for federal and state changes to make progress in this realm as well, because many of the sort of rules that could be reformed to help get people into units faster, the city actually doesn't have the authority to change. So we're really looking to do everything we can at the municipal level to improve the processes, and then also working with our federal and state partners to make additional changes that will make an even greater difference. And I just wanted to finish up by sharing some recent highlights and announcements from the past month or so, and to show you some of our recent work on the Housing and Homelessness Blueprint and what we're doing to implement it. So earlier in October, we issued the draft voting rules for the NYCHA Preservation Trust. This is really exciting because it opens up a lot of new resources and another option to address the capital needs at NYCHA and make sure that we're improving and preserving our public housing stock in the long term. So NYCHA is currently in the process of setting up the Preservation Trust and working really closely with residents and leaders to do so. just a couple of weeks ago, the mayor announced a suite of process changes and additional funding to streamline and expand access to housing vouchers. So we funded several changes to city FEPs that will help more households in shelter become eligible for city FEPs, and as well as invested significant resources in HRA and DHS staffing so that HRA can have a larger presence in housing court, as well as be able to process vouchers and move people into units quicker. DSS also recently launched its Street to Housing pilot, which is a really exciting initiative where the DSS street outreach teams are actually identifying clients who are currently unsheltered, and then moving them directly into supportive housing and doing all of their paperwork and sort of eligibility processing and certification once they're already in the unit. So this totally cuts down on the processing time and doesn't require that these individuals go into shelter. And so this being done for about 80 units right now as a pilot, and then we will assess opportunities to potentially scale up in the future. HPD and in coordination with DCP has been announcing a series of really exciting, important new affordable housing projects across the city. Most recently, we announced huge affordable housing investments at Willets Point, and these plans together will produce more than 6,500 units of affordable housing at several new sites that we achieved approvals on in the past few months. And we also recently committed $123 million in federal grant funds for disaster recovery to sustainability and resiliency initiatives that are explicitly focused on housing. This goes everything from helping homeowners to helping upgrade the resiliency of the public housing stock, to preservation programs for larger rental buildings as well. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Could you not unshare your screen?
Mhm.
Okay. Do the other agencies have something to add before we take questions and answers?
Nope, just the process of putting this together. I've been in government for 10 years, and this has truly been one of the more transformative moments for me. The kind of collaboration, the willingness to see things from a 360 lens. This document sets us on a really strong path forward, comes with a ton of strong commitments out of this administration. And we have a chief housing officer and a commissioner who really wants to get some stuff done. To borrow a phrase that's often used. So excited to talk and answer any questions about it.
Okay, so now we will take questions from committee members. Either committee, you need to raise your hand. Your virtual hand, if possible. Okay. Susan.
Yeah, if any committee members want to go first, that's fine. I have.
Okay, Susan, and then, well, there's Alicia also. She just raised her
I
hand.
let Alicia go first.
Alicia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. It looks very promising. And, I have a little bit of a comment as well as a question. So I currently have a family member that is housed in one of the city shelters in Queens, and he's close to the 90-day process and getting his voucher. One of the things that we have been discussing with him was when you get your voucher, what do you do? Have they told you what you have to do? He says, yes, he's been going on all of the housing websites that he's, been trying his best to apply for everything. Again, it's a lottery. And they have a 90-day to get these vouchers filled. What happens when the person does not, if they get the voucher, they get into some type of housing situation, but these programs only last for like a year or two. And then if they are not able to afford the rent at that point, after the program ends, sometimes they get into these special programs or whatever. What happens then? Is there a safety net in place to help those people that can no longer afford those rents? Because I'm not hearing such great results about those type of programs. And then the other comment is, whatever happened to SRO, single room occupancy, for people that cannot or maybe not equipped enough to handle a full apartment? Are we not building those anymore? So that's my question, and thank you so much.
So thanks for your question. I just want to, so on the first bit, I'll say that for affordable housing units that are, rented out through the housing lottery, those rents are set in a regulatory agreement that requires them to be affordable for, a certain period of time, several decades. And I'll let Iris from DHS speak to the voucher side of things, but for those units that we're subsidizing to make them affordable, there's not really that same, there's not really like the risk that you're referencing, I think.
So there's several ways how someone can become eligible for a voucher. It could be age, it could be income, they could be on disability. So as Sheena is saying, if we are moving someone into these affordable housing, for the most part, the client pays 1/3 of their income. In the event the individual can no longer afford, usually what happens if they're moving out, particularly for City Fed voucher, we have a team that works in the community that is called with home base and prevention. And the goal is that if a lease is going to be expiring, whether year 1 or year 2, if we know this individual may be encountering difficulties, they can be referred to home base, who will work with that individual to ensure that that person remains in the unit. So once someone leaves and it's in the community, DSS has a program that is home-based that avoids or prevents people from having to return into shelter.
And then on the SRO's question, you're right that we don't build SROs in the same way that we used to. They're not common anymore. There is some legacy stock, but our rules, really, our city zoning and building codes, lots of regulations actually do prevent the creation of new SROs. One thing that we're looking to do with City of Yes is figure out how we can make some of those rules a little bit more flexible so that we can accommodate a wider range of housing sizes and types. So, for some people, a very small sort of efficiency unit is all that they need, and that's appropriate. It can be difficult to sort of make different types of housing under our current regulations. And so we're looking at ways to really expand flexibility through the zoning changes in City of Yes.
And if I could just add 2 things you would want to look at. So you can see in our term sheets that we recognize that we have a city of individuals that don't have a housing stock that meets that population. So in our term sheets, we actually try to show that and make sure we have ample studio and 1-bedrooms available for individuals who are coming into that kind of permanent housing. Separate and apart, the city has been working toward this larger model of bringing back that type of housing through our Share NYC program. It's something that we're hoping to grow as we develop it more, using the zoning and building code relief that Sheena spoke about. We have a couple of projects in the pipeline that will hopefully grow once this administration's policies is able to take root and be able to help that type of housing flourish as well.
Also want to add, while the city is looking at how they could bring more and build. They are current, some in the stock, but it is based on re-rental. So if someone vacates a current one, that is offered to oftentimes to many of our folks that are in shelter. So it's not, we don't have a large new unit, but we do have, as Sheena mentioned, it old SROs, and when they do become vacant, they are offered to our shelter clients. And I do want to also bring up that the voucher, particularly for a single individual, gives the option that if they don't feel comfortable renting an apartment or moving into an apartment, they can rent a room, and the voucher allows for that.
Okay. Okay. Next we have Susan, and then Sandra, and then Jake.
Okay, I'll ask a very small batch of questions first. Excuse me. First, I don't know if the mayor's office and the agencies have a lot of background on Community Board 3. So I just want to mention that our top 3 priorities are and have been for years: affordable housing, homelessness, and seniors. And among our top budget priorities, particularly this year, well, for almost every year, is more safe havens, which is very difficult to get. And from HPD, we asked for more city investment in subsidizing affordable housing. I'd like to mention one way we can preserve small amounts of affordable housing. You know, if a grandfathered commercial unit becomes vacant after 2 years, it reverts to residential if it's in a residential zone. Several administrations ago, it was very easy to get Department of Buildings to act on this and put the burden on the commercial renter. Now it's almost impossible. I worked on many of these, or tried very unsuccessfully to work on many of these situations. I'm currently working on 2 units right now. So I think having Department of Buildings have commercial units in residential areas that have reverted to residential, to have them comply would be helpful. I would, on the street to housing, what kind of housing is that? Is that safe havens? Is that more supportive permanent housing? What kind of housing is that?
Yeah, so the street to housing pilot is supportive housing. So that is affordable housing with supportive services on site for individuals who are chronically homeless and have a serious mental illness or potentially substance use. And this pilot is moving unsheltered DSS street outreach clients directly into units that are affordable and have those supportive services on site.
So when you talk about the DHS outreach, are you speaking about the outreach workers that have the contract from Manhattan Outreach Consortium? Because the people actually on the street are people that have the contract with DHS. Is that who you're talking about, who's flagging the people?
Yes,
Okay.
the
In other
folks that
words,
refer the unit are all the contractor, the providers that are contracted by Department of Homeless Service. That's
okay,
correct.
so that would be Goddard for us.
Manhattan, yes, is Goddard, and then Common Ground would be Queens and every different borough, correct.
Okay. So I have just one more comment right now. We all agree that we need tremendous amount more units of safe havens and other types of housing like of that sort. We were going to have a wonderful safe haven project on Madison Street, which the city pulled back on for reasons of fairness and equity, unquote. Is there any chance now that the crisis has gotten worse, we can get that project that was being run by Catholic Charities back?
So I'll defer to DHS on that one.
So I know there were several projects, particularly in Community Board 3, that were pulled back, as you said, Susan.
Just one.
I think there was well, maybe not Community Board 3. I think there was one on Pearl, some other area. We definitely could take a look. I do know that administration is looking, as you mentioned, areas where there is none shelters in safe haven for the same reason you've laid out, but definitely could bring it back to the administration. You're right, we are particularly in a crisis, particularly with the new asylum seekers that are entering shelter. So we never encounter someone come to us and say they want us. So we'll bring it back and see where it lands. So
We said we wanted it when it was first brought to us. It is a wonderful provider who I believe would probably still go forward as Catholic Charities. So, you know, it was something that Community Board 3 wanted. So if you could take a second look at it, that would be great.
Can I also comment, just piggybacking on what Iris said? Hi, Susan.
Right.
In fact, I just want to mitigate a little bit because there's so many reasons that a project will not move forward. And I just want to make sure that we are not giving false hope. So we'll definitely have to look deeper back into it. And we may not, in fact, be able to revive the particular project that you're pointing to. But as Iris has mentioned, we don't always get a warm welcome. And so we will certainly consider this a warm welcome and start to look, and with the help of the community board, to something that works similarly to the one that you desire.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember when you had to call me and tell us we weren't getting it.
Yeah, but I make a lot of calls like that, so you'd be surprised.
Okay, thank you. Next will be Sandra, and after that, Jake.
Hi, my first question is, can I get a copy of the presentation? Some of the board members that actually do live in NYCHA weren't able to come today. So I think they'd like to have this, but it will be on YouTube, right?
Yes.
Right. Eventually, yeah, okay. So number one is about the trust. How long will it take actually to finalize the trust? What steps are left to actually get this rolling?
So we're in the process of putting together the trust. I don't want to misspeak, so I'd have to probably get back to you on the exact timeline of, go check the legislation and get back to you on the exact timeline of when everything will be finalized and set up. But there are, you know, benchmarks that the legislation sort of sets out for when we have to accomplish certain steps in the process by, and we can certainly get you that information.
And that won't happen. So the repairs tonight, it won't happen until after that, after you get total approval, right?
So the first step is to actually set up the entity itself and make sure that the way that decisions are being made and that the way that the entity is structured is that we're getting really good input and feedback from residents who, you know, will potentially be benefiting from the projects that go through the trust. And once all that is finalized and we have all of the rules and the governance structure and everything in place, then we'll begin to be able to start the actual projects and the rehabs.
Okay, so my next question is, I live in Section 8 housing, and I want to know about the trust to understand it. You know, going from Section 9 to Section 8, tenants lose a lot of protections, right? And protections meaning that they cannot go to like local officials for support to get something fixed. At Section 8, we have to go to housing court, you know, to press the owner into doing stuff. Does it work the same way with this trust? How can residents address issues that arise instead of going to court?
So the Public Housing Preservation Trust preserves all of the same rights and legal protections for
And
tenants.
section 9.
Yes, as regular public housing, correct. I'm not sure, Ahmed, do you want to speak to the section 8 piece? I'm not in terms of how you go to get issues solved.
Ms. Streller, I'm assuming that you're making a position that when there's an issue with your building, that you found that elected officials were more effective at addressing their issue to NYCHA and getting it fixed versus an individual.
No. I'm in section 8. I don't live in section 9.
No, but you're making a comparison that's saying that section 9 residents had an easier time getting elected official support to get their issues fixed because the landlord in this entity is NYCHA and not a private landlord.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to say one thing and then Sheena can correct me. One, NYCHA is still is a huge presence in the structure, the ownership structure of those buildings. They're holding the owners accountable. The elected officials still can go to NYCHA and the owners of those buildings and hold them accountable for the fixes that need to be made. That's part of the remaining, the existing protections that don't change that Sheena was referring to. And yes, for a Section 8 tenant, they would come to their elected officials and they would be forcing a private owner. But remember, even Section 8 tenants where they're seeing issues with the owners, they still go to their elected officials, they still come to the city, and the city has an agreement with those owners, which we leverage to get those owners to make changes. So both Section 9 tenants in this instance, they actually have the same levers that they had previously, both NYCHA and elected officials. And Section 8 tenants have both elected officials and the Public Housing Authority that gives them the voucher so that they can lean on the landlord to make the fixes. We basically, what we do is we shut off payment if that can't be addressed. In both instances, that protection exists.
Does the trust also provide for funding like Section 9 does, like for family day events?
So Section 9 funding doesn't necessarily provide, so NYCHA pays for things like family day events, and the Preservation Trust will be very closely related to NYCHA. I don't want to speak in legal terms, but I think that NYCHA residents who are in projects, living in developments that are rehabilitated through the Preservation Trust will still be, a part of the NYCHA community and able to participate and benefit in those types of benefits that NYCHA provides. Okay.
And one last question about the home base for residents that need financial assistance in paying back rent. One of the steps to getting money from home base is going to HR, to human resources. You have to apply for a one-shot deal before you can get money from home base, right? So is there any way that you can expedite that? It's like several steps that you have to go through in order to get that approval. And that's with most funding sources for back rent. Is there any way that you can because a lot of people don't know, and they get really frustrated and afraid when they get those notices, and they don't even attempt and they wound up evicted.
Yeah, so we're looking at ways to really streamline those processes and access to benefits like one-shot deals all across the board. So we're really focused on, reducing the time that it takes to access those benefits and just making it easier and building in, more technology and more different options that can really speed that process up and reduce the steps involved. I also want to point out that one of our recent announcements and accomplishments that we committed significant additional funding for HRA staffers to actually be present in housing court so that any folks who are there because they are potentially facing an eviction proceeding actually have someone who can physically help them you say, you know, hey, you're probably eligible for
Great.
this, a one-shot deal, and actually be able to help them go ahead and address that on the spot. So
That's great.
that's
Thank
really
you.
exciting.
Thank you. That's it, May.
So the next is Jake.
Hi, all. Thanks so much for being here and thanks for the presentation. I have a quick and kind of high level question. I think it's, and I guess a little bit of a comment, but not really. I think it's great that you guys are tracking more metrics as a part of this and kind of keeping tabs on the numbers. Are there goals? And I think specifically for CB3, do we have goals for the number of new affordable units that are going to be going on the market here, goals for the number of work orders that we're going to clear? You know, the things that we're working to fix here, are there targets or are we just tracking the numbers?
So with a lot of the metrics that are new, we actually are still building out the like systems that it's needed to even really look at these things over a long period of time. So for example, some of the new metrics that we added to the mayor's manager report this year were on how long it takes to sort of get through the housing lottery process and get to an approval for a unit through Housing Connect. And because that's really it's really a shift in how we're measuring our progress and how we're thinking about our impact as government. And so there's a lot of sort of systematic changes that need to be put into place so that we can get a better understanding of what the history of those numbers has been so that we can then set targets for improvement. So since a lot of these metrics are new, we don't have targets for them all yet. But that's definitely something that we're looking to do down the line once we have been looking at these things for a longer, more consistent period of time. So we can set, you know, really realistic targets that will still have a really impactful change.
And if I can just add, so one thing while we work on those numbers from a policy intention place, just know that we are looking specifically to build more housing in more communities, especially in areas that have low affordability. So neighborhoods where the costs have gone up, neighborhoods where we can see more opportunity to leverage more public land. For instance, we hope to move forward with an RFP on East 5th Street in Community Board 3, which would be a next great project for us to do. So both the combination of focusing more housing in more areas, especially in low affordability neighborhoods. In addition, we have on the voucher side expanded the purchase power of those vouchers by basically gave them more money to be in more areas to afford more expensive apartments. Some of that comes through updates in HUD's fair market values. Some of it comes from our ability to expand that presence. There's these things called exception payment standards that allow you to pay even more in expensive areas of the city. So we're supporting that and helping people connect to apartments in that way. That's us. That's part of our public engagement unit. That's HRA. That's an example of breaking down the silos and working together. And then I think the last part of it that's important is that even in our subsidy standards, we had this legacy of having maybe more stricter subsidy standards than we need to at the moment because of where we are with federal funding. And so under this administration, we adjusted those subsidy standards. Again, it gives people more options to be able to use those vouchers, more options to use the vouchers in high affordability areas, more purchase powers with the vouchers in high affordability areas. And we're looking from a development and investment perspective to look at areas that are expensive and have low affordability. So less affordable housing that we think that those areas need.
May, do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up?
Oh, who's that? Oh, Jake?
This is Jake. This is
Oh,
Jake.
yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead.
My
Go
hand
ahead.
went down, I guess.
Okay, go ahead.
And I support all of those things. I think my question is, and this would help us in figuring out how we can support this agenda, is in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, like, how can we figure out what a win looks like for these things? Because I think that you could say that all of these things are a win if the process improves, because frankly, things are not great as it stands. But I think it would be helpful in understanding kind of the cadence we should be taking in figuring out how to get new affordable housing on the market in figuring out what we can do in land use, housing, and the NYCHA committee, like what we can be doing to support you guys, I think depends on, and the cadence that we do that depends on what the goals are that the mayor's office is willing to stick their neck out for. Does that make sense? I guess what I'm voicing is a desire for concrete metrics that can help us help you, so that we can figure out what a win looks like, because we want the win too.
Well, sorry, Sheena, did you want to start?
Go ahead.
So I think, as Sheena pointed out, we've just started doing something which we didn't do before. You'll see a far more expanded set of metrics in our regular reporting. We're still building out what that means and how granular it should go. We think both from a citywide perspective and a neighborhood perspective and how we get these things done, but we're building out, I think, we're trying to build out to the kind of numbers that you're talking about. I think in the interim, because we've got the largest capital budget that we have, we've got this focus on, and when I said low affordability areas, I mean areas like Manhattan, where it's expensive to live, and particularly we need more investment to be able to make new units happen. As committee members see opportunities for us to move projects forward, see either on public or private land, bringing that information to us so that we can evaluate those projects, see what we can do to put them online. We desperately need help recruiting owners who have available units so we can match them with voucher holders. We have a citywide campaign, I Vouch for Vouchers. We have materials, we have education opportunities for owners. So if owners come by your committee or you're in contact with owners, we can pull them into a system we have in place to tie voucher holders to placements. But right now that's working backward. You want to see the number and work backward from there. And I think we're still figuring out the metrics part of it, at least speaking for HPD. And then so for in the interim, if we can work forwards to back, which is find us opportunities, we'll work with you to match them, find us owners with units, we'll find them people who have vouchers so that they get stable income and the other folks with the vouchers get a stable home.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next is Anna and then Susan.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for talking to us. My question is, who do you prioritize first? A homeless person from the street or a family of four? I'm a New Yorker, I'm a city worker, and it's sad to say I'm 48 years old living at home with my mother, with my 3 kids. I applied for Section 8, I'm still waiting. I applied for housing, I've been on the waiting list for 5 years. And sometimes I think this is so unfair.
So we have a variety of different types of housing and services that we provide to address different needs. I mean, I think I think it's less of a distinction of who do you prioritize first and more of just making sure that we are providing as much as we possibly can for all of the different types of New Yorkers who are out there in all of their different situations, because we do understand that there are millions of different situations that folks might be facing, and that the constraints that places on your ability to achieve a secure affordable housing and stay in that housing are very different. And so we're really looking to provide tools and programs and resources that can help all New Yorkers be able to access affordable homes. But we know also that we have a long way to go. The housing market is very tight. There's not a lot of options. Prices are very high. And so we're looking to these solutions that we've laid out in this plan to hopefully address all of those problems across the board.
Thank you.
Susan?
Okay, thank you. A few more things. Someone needs to mute. I was really glad to hear you're working with shelter residents on the needs, and I think it would be interesting, I don't know if you could do it now, but it would be really interesting to us, excuse me, to hear the results of that. We have one single male adult shelter in, it's actually a block away from the community board. That really is unsafe. I work closely with them, and there really are problems there, even though they have excellent providers, they have excellent security. It's just and I wonder how much the design of the congregate shelters allow for more problems. And I wondered if there had been any thought of redesigning some of the very large congregate shelters. Two more things I want to mention. In past administrations, community boards and other stakeholders have been part of the conversation. We are no longer part of the conversation, even though we are very involved. Can we be included as stakeholders in trying to help, because we have the same goals? And my last question is to go back to the DOB issue with units that are supposed to revert back to residential. Can we follow up so that I can maybe explain the situation more to the mayor's office and see? I think this is something that could very easily be corrected. Is that something we could follow up on?
So I want to speak to your second and your third questions first, and then I'll let DHS address the question about shelter design. So on the second question, we absolutely welcome and really appreciate your partnership. And this hopefully is the first of many conversations that we can have together. You know, as Ahmed was saying, we might not be able to give you a specific directive in terms of an exact number to reach of units in the next number of years, but we want to work with you to create opportunities for affordable housing in your community and make sure that your community has the affordable housing and access and options that it needs. So I think that the framework that we've laid out in Housing Our Neighbors and the blueprint is really intended to be just that. It's a framework for us to be able to then come to communities and look at the needs at the neighborhood level and understand that this is our high level vision and be able to work with you to move that forward. So I just want to express my gratitude for you having us and hope that we can continue to have these conversations and work together on both policy recommendations and specific projects. We always welcome that type of engagement. And then I think to that point, as a segue, I guess, to the third question, I'm happy to talk about the DOB issue. I think it sounds like maybe something that is a technical thing that could warrant another conversation. So we should definitely find a little bit of time to follow up, and I can just get the details and bring that back to the team.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up right now, but I have a question. Oh, there is a hand up. Oh, Sandra.
Is DHS going to answer my last question?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so on the first question, Iris, do you want to take that one in terms of shelter design?
So, you know, the administration is and continues to look at opening shelters. It's in conjunction with affordable housing. We know there's a need for both. And one of the things that we are taking a look is which shelters we could bring along and how it best serves the population. We've heard a lot about congregate versus individual units versus smaller dorms, and it's something that's being taken into consideration with bringing in new development. So to answer your question, Susan, yes, it's something that it's being looked at, and how we bring in new facilities is a matter of what we are really considering.
Well, I was wondering whether, like for Third Street Men's Shelter, whether redesign of the existing shelter has been considered, because there certainly are problems there. And
at 80s Third, yeah, with Project Renewal. I could tell you right now, I want to be full transparent. We have not taken a look at current and existing shelters. We are now looking at the ones that we bring in, but something that we could definitely have a conversation. I know you're in support and have been very supportive of 80s Third with many of the projects that they have with their kitchen and all things. So I'm very familiar and definitely could continue that conversation.
Thank you. And May, I just want to let the committee know, as far as the NYCHA Trust, they are scheduled, NYCHA scheduled to come to us in January to talk about the trust.
That's for land use, right?
Yes, for land use.
Sandra.
Yeah, so my last question is, so with the influx of all these people, like we're Yes City, right? All the people that are coming in here from Texas on the emergency basis, how does that impact someone, say, Anna's need for an apartment? How are you guys balancing the need for the existing homeless and the homeless that are coming in? Is that all?
So I think it is obviously a challenge, but we have and will continue to do our best to serve everyone and provide the shelter and services that everyone needs. And that is our goal and our intention.
What I mean, isn't it like a strategy, like 1, 2, 3 new people, 1, 2, 3 residents? Is there a priority there?
So I think when it comes to shelter, the city of New York has a mandate, so everyone is being sheltered. So there's no 1, 2, 3 new, 1, 2, 3 old. Everyone that comes through, everyone that has come through our door, we've had the obligation to provide shelter, and we have done so. There's no, do we prioritize the new versus the old? We've ensured that there's shelter for all at this point.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, so I don't see any other hands raised right now. But I did also have a question about, the recent wave of refugees and asylum seekers. And, generally, immigrants came here because usually they had a family member here. And, you stay with the family and then, your relatives. And then, when you get on your own feet, then you find your own place. But, we're talking about new waves of immigrants that don't have families here. So such as the Ukrainians. And now we have, then there was this whole huge wave of people from the southern border from the Port Authority buses. So I was wondering about the language access issue, because some of these people will stay in New York, and some may actually, like the ones on the buses, they didn't want to come to New York, so they might be ending up somewhere else, where they really wanted to go. So we'll have a new population, immigrants, non-English speaking. I guess maybe this is more a question for DHS in terms of language access, if they are to go into, these temporary shelters or supportive housing, what, have you thought about that? It's something actually before this all happened, the Human Services Committee talked a little bit about it. But
so as I mentioned previously, we've seen over 20,000 individuals come through the city of New York. Some are within DHS, some are now with the humanitarian, the HERC that the city opened. In all our facilities, we have contracts, which is the language line. So we are providing services in the language that those individuals speak. We also, in some of our locations, particularly our intake, have contracts with actual interpreters that are on site that assist us with the barrier of the language. So when at all our intakes, we have individuals actually stationed at our intake that facilitate and help us communicate with the individuals. And when they move along, then we work particularly with the contract that the city has, where we have language access to the language line.
So it's mainly like a telephonic translation.
When
you say language line, you mean telephone, right?
Telephonic, but at our intake, we have actual individuals that are stationed there that are doing actual live and individuals translating.
Oh, okay.
So we have interpreters.
Okay, you're speaking of that, like the intake center in the Bronx?
Intake center in the Bronx for families with children, intake at Manhattan 30th Street for individual men and adult families. And we also have our intake for women also all in the Bronx. All 4 of these locations have actual individuals, live bodies, providing interpretation services.
Okay. Sometimes the experience is different from, it's not, the experience isn't that good. That's all I have to say.
Language line is not adequate.
Okay, are there any other questions? Any other? All right, I don't see any other hands raised. Okay, so,
Michelle
yes,
has her.
Michelle? Yes, Michelle.
I'm not a committee member, so is it okay to ask questions
Yes,
now?
go
Are you
ahead.
done with
Yes,
all?
yes.
Okay. Thanks, May. So I have a question about similar to Susan and Jake about specific to our district, which is we had talked about the safe havens, one on Madison Street, and then that was killed, and then one on Grand Street, which is just outside of CD3, but very, very close to us. That was also killed. And now we have one that I believe is still in the pipeline, 91 East Broadway. And I would love to hear if that's still happening and what the timeline for that is, because as Susan said, this is something that's top of the list for the district.
Still on. I don't
What's
have
happening? Yeah,
I don't
but
have a timeline, but it's still on.
does DHS have a timeline for that? We're in a desperate housing crisis, as we've learned.
I think our DC for Intergov, Marika, is she still on?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not camera ready at the moment, but I'm not prepared to speak to the particulars of that. And I'd like to circle back with you with the details, but the question was, is it moving forward?
And what's the status of it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't like to speak out of turn and give perhaps inaccurate information. And I wasn't prepared to speak about that today, but I can get you, I can circle back to the whole board tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that my question goes to sort of what Jake was alluding to as well, which is that this presentation was lacking specifics in general and specifics about CD3 specifically. And, you know, we are in a desperate need for housing. And as Susan mentioned, safe havens have always been something that we want here. And I think that bears repeating. And we consistently support safe havens that are proposed in this district. So I would hope that we can find out what is happening with 91 East Broadway and that hopefully it's online shortly. And that there will be more like them coming and not killed in nascency. So thank you.
I think make May able to help. I think it was scheduled for 2024. Isn't that correct, May?
Yes. The original plan.
Yeah, I have.
Which was, it was discussed at our committee meetings and it's presented there. So
yeah, I think
Right, I just worry given what happened to the other two that
no, they called us immediately, and it was unfortunate and a bad call, but they did call us immediately when it was taken off.
Oh no, I understand, but that doesn't prevent them from calling you in a year and saying it's been taken offline.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to make sure is not
So
happening.
I'm going to say I really don't expect that to happen.
Okay, good.
I think what they did, to be real honest, in public, I think what they did is took the smallest safe haven to give some, as you know, there were crowds protesting, and I think it was to give something to that group, which was not fair and equitable, but I think that's what was happening. It certainly was no problem at Catholic Charities. There was no problem with the project. And, I'm hoping they will reconsider.
Thanks, Susan.
okay. Last call for questions.
Can I just say thank you? It's really, I think, really helpful to get agencies in the same room. I find one of the problems is lack of coordination between agencies, and I think it's really helpful, and this was very productive.
And hopefully this is something that we can, move forward and continue, and especially specific to our area, right, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't ask for specifics to our area, but possibly we can follow up with that at a later date, particularly in light of the new programs that have been announced. Perhaps in the near future, we can see how that will impact us directly.
It was good to get the overview, though.
Yeah,
Okay.
we would love to continue the conversation. Thank you for having us and for letting us give you the overall big spiel today. We definitely look forward to partnering with you on more specifics about your district, whether it's specific projects or looking at the sort of needs and resources in your district overall. So we're happy to continue those conversations and look forward to doing so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you
right,
all. Have a
thank
great
you,
night.
folks. Have a great night.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
All right. Now, I know that for human services, we have to do some CAB and CEC reports. I don't know what else, Jake, you guys have anything like that? Or are you ready to go?
I don't believe so. I think that we're ready to wrap. Susan, is that right?
Yeah, I think you should just take attendance and then the land use can get off.
Yeah, you can just take attendance for land use.
Fantastic. I can do that, I think. Anisha Stephen is absent. Feel better, Anisha. Jake Gold, present. Alastair Akonomikis is absent. Andrew Gordia, absent. Herman Hewitt, absent. Trevor Holland, absent.
I'm the president here.
Very nice to meet you. I'm Jason. What's your name? I'm sorry.
Alicia Lewis Coleman.
Oh, Alicia's, no, she's on our committee. No, just do the attendance for your
So,
committee.
yeah, sorry, that's what I thought I was doing. This thing, the attendance thing got all messed up.
Okay, yeah.
Damaris Reyes, absent. Sandra Strother is still here. Hi, Sandra.
Yes, good night. Good night.
Good night. Jackie is absent. Arnett Scott is still absent. Dominic Berg, still absent. And Steve Herrick, still absent. All right, that's a wrap on land use.
Okay.
Thank you, May, for doing an excellent job hosting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so all you Human Service Committee members should stay on. We still have a CAB report, and after that, we will adjourn. Okay, Human Service Committee members, CAB and CEC reports. I know that there was I don't see Arnett here today, but I know that there was a Mount Sinai Beth Israel CAB meeting, and Shirley was not able, our rep was not able to go, but Carmen did go in her place. And Carmen, can you talk to us about the meeting?
Sure. Actually, it was a joint CAB meeting with the Beth Israel, Mount Sinai West, formerly known as Roosevelt, and also Mount Sinai Morningside, formerly known as St. Luke's. And so they were all together. Basically, we had one very special guest, and that's outgoing Assembly member Richard Gottfried, who is, I guess, retiring after so many years, and also as a pivotal member, being that he was chair of the Health Committee for so many years. Not only were we there to pretty much honor him and say goodbye, which was pretty bittersweet. I know that so many years of, I partnering with him in the many hats that I've worn over the years, for public health and pivotal laws that really have improved, how healthcare is in New York State. But he did say that he is grooming someone that's been working with him for quite some time, who will now take over as chair in January. And he also mentioned a couple of laws that he has in the books that he would like to see passed before he goes away. But it was mostly pretty much everyone, singing his praises and saying how much he'll be missed.
Okay, so it was mainly a meeting with him, or?
It was just him, really. And
Okay.
the 4 hospitals or 3 hospitals that were involved.
Oh, okay, but they had nothing about the hospital itself, right? I guess because it was a joint meeting of different hospitals, yeah.
It was mostly to have that discussion with Assemblymember Gottfried.
Okay, all right.
So
Okay. Go ahead,
Brad did
Susan.
commit to coming in January.
Okay, great. Yeah, so, we'll have them at our, as you recall, at the last meeting, we wanted, to continue, our update. We'll get our update from Mount Sinai Beth Israel about, their plans. And this, Susan has confirmed him for January. Laura's not here. Arnett's not here. Larissa's not here. Okay, so were there any other CAB CEC meetings that this group went to? No, I doubt it.
None of the shelters have been having meetings since COVID.
Okay. So I think that covers it. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Okay. Also, there's this World Trade Center thing, which will be talked about at exec probably. Susan?
I don't know. So no, I know what it,
yeah.
I know what it is. That
Uh-huh.
was Val used to be on this committee, and as a member of this committee was a rep for the World Trade Center, the organization they have dealing with health issues. And since she's not on the committee, she no longer reports to the committee. So maybe I think that's probably an issue to figure out. And some of the boards did resolutions supporting, I guess it's more funding.
Right.
But my understanding, she was talking about putting it on the agenda, but my understanding is that it has to be voted on by Congress before Christmas, because once this Congress is gone, it's never going to get more money. So I don't know, it may all be resolved. I don't know what's happening.
Okay, yeah, it was introduced by Carolyn Maloney. So she'll vote for it. And our other rep, Nydia Velasquez, will most certainly vote for it. So while it would be nice if we had an opinion, it might be kind of late, and it might not impact the decisions of our Congress members because they'll vote for it anyway. And it's something that we would support because we had supported the program before. And so this is about continuing the program. So it's not a controversial thing for us, but it just all may not have a great deal of impact and maybe a bit late in the end.
Yes. So maybe by the time of the exec, we'll see what the status is.
Right, because Congress may have voted on it already. Huh?
Yeah, if they vote on it already, there's no point.
Yeah, okay. All right, so so for the January meeting, we have the one agenda item with Mount Sinai Beth Israel. And I think that's all we have for now.
So I'm going to follow up on that Madison Street.
Okay, very good. yeah, it's worth a follow-up, I think. She asked you to, right? She said she could talk to you about it. Did she say that?
That was, I asked to talk to her about the Department of Buildings, doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as, units that are supposed to revert to residential. But, I'm gonna certainly remind DHS that they're gonna revisit that.
Okay, very good. Okay, is there any other new business, old business? That,
May, I'm
Yes.
just gonna ask you, I did not get your email yesterday. If you could try and forward it to me again, so I can try and figure out what's wrong.
I forwarded to you this afternoon.
Oh, well, I'm still not getting it then. I'm gonna send
Okay.
you my home personal email and see if you could send it there.
Okay. All right, so Thomas, would you like to take the last attendance?
Sure. I apologize about the camera. My settings on the computer are a little funky right now. Mei Lee,
Yes, here.
present. Okay. Ana Calderon,
Here.
Larry Fenn,
Here.
Rodney Washington,
Here.
and Carmen Perez.
Present.
Okay. Thank you,
But
everyone.
could you just call everyone?
I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. I didn't want to. Larissa, I have as absent. David, I have absent. Eric,
But David is not on the committee.
I'm sorry. He was on the. Okay. Let me get that off.
That's the fault of the office.
Gotcha. No problem. Alicia, she's part of the committee as well?
Yes, but she left.
Okay, so
She is
Alicia,
absent.
she's absent. I have Laura's absent, Heidi absent, Arnett, and that's the final name I have. Then Rodney and Carmen present.
Yeah, Heidi's on leave.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned. I see you at full board.
All right, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Happy holidays.
You
Good
too.
night.